You're listening to Jay's Analysis. This is the introduction to the Jay's Analysis podcast. The only authoritative source for Jay's Analysis is Jay's Analysis. Film, philosophy, geopolitics, the esoteric, and much, much more. Satire and comedy too, now added bonus for free. Another episode of Jay's Analysis. Thank you for catching this clip. If you like this, definitely subscribe to Jay's Analysis. If you're a subscriber, thank you. I may just release this one to subscribers since I was busy last week and didn't get to doing one of these. But as I said, we're going to look at Grand Chessboard and a little bit of background again as a refresher on Brzezinski. In case we've forgotten, he is one of the behemoths of the New World Order. He's one of the gophers of the globalists, and he, of course, attended McGill University, fled the Soviets with his family, and as a result, he developed, of course, a very severe Russophobia, a very anti-Russian attitude. And as the descendants of Polish nobility, he would go on to become an important academic. And it was his work at McGill University and then subsequently the publishing of Between Two Ages, which we dealt with in the last talk in 1970, 73, when 70. And then that's what caught the attention of Daddy Rockefeller himself, David, and the pimp dad of the mob of mobs, the Rockefellers, decided that they had a budding young prodigy here. And so they put Brzezinski into a lot of important roles. And of course, McGill University, as we said last time, is very important for being a hub of the MKUltra project. And that's, of course, why Brzezinski's work is very important. And why it reflects a lot of MKUltra style stuff in a lot of the footnotes, as I mentioned in the talk. From McGill, he would go on to Harvard and to become one of the white shoe boys, to use the Gerald Celente terminology. And from there, he would go on to Columbia and to teaching international studies and so forth. He would become part of the State Department's Policy Planning Committee in the 60s. And it's from there that he would just kind of go on to more and more and more deep state think tankery. And he wrote a memoir about his White House years after the Carter period when he was National Security Advisor. And the memoir was Power and Principle. And he talked a lot about the objectives of containing the Soviets, and he thought that it was important to increase the American ideology across the globe, and that it was really America, quote unquote, the tool of the globalists, of course, not any kind of real notion of organic Americanism, but rather this idea of the corporate monoculture. That's what would be spread. And that's why you can't really classify Brzezinski as a socialist or a communist or a capitalist. He's not really any of those. He's above the fray. But he did have this very interesting idea of Americanizing the globe. And that's why he was chosen. And in 1973, he was the first director, the beginning of the Trilateral Commission, created by the Rockefellers. And, of course, he was behind many deep state machinations and would become a big behind-the-scenes man in the Obama administration. He would be a big proponent of climate change, carbon taxes, all that stuff. And so we have, again, one of the major, probably the major globalist geostrategist of this latter half of the 20th century, at least. And so that's why he's important. And now we're going to look at the 1997 book, The Grand Chessboard, which is going to deal with the topic of America, quote unquote, i.e. tool of the globalists, retaining its hegemony. And how do we keep any possible or potential rising force from ever getting out of the hand of the dialectical demonic managers? Well, you do that through the strategies that he's going to lay out. Now, he's already been laying out strategies, and one of those that we're going to talk about is the arc of crisis. Now, this had been discussed by Bernard Lewis and Samuel P. Huntington, who were both connected academically speaking. Huntington would adopt a lot of Lewis's ideas, and then and Lewis is who coined the term strategy of tension, of course, and clash of civilizations, strategy of tension, of course, the older idea. But what we're going to see in Grand Chessboard is the nation states as chess pieces on the chessboard, and who moves the chess pieces? The bankers, right? So you can view the nation states kind of like big corporate entities in a way that are owned and moved and controlled. And we saw the technocratic model is what dominates the thinking of Brzezinski in the 1970 book Between Two Ages. And that's why Rockefeller found him to be so useful, is that he would promote not just Americanism, but the global technocratic model. And in this way, he is in the line of thinkers such as H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, the Huxleys, right? All of the progenitors of technocracy, and all the way back into the 19-teens and 20s, the idea of the future Congress and so forth, where the technocrats laid out their futurism, their plans of crafting the shape of things to come, to use the H.G. Wellsian terminology. And craft is absolutely appropriate because H.G. Wells was a hyper Mason. He wasn't just a Mason, he was like a mega Mason. And I don't know that Brzezinski was necessarily a Mason. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but I haven't found any evidence of him being a Mason, probably because he, in many ways, I would say, likely transcends Masonry. He doesn't see it as, it probably isn't even that big of a deal on his radar. Now, I could be wrong. He could be secretly a Mason. I just don't know. But he probably sees Masonry as just another chess piece, right? Another piece on the chessboard that might be in all the nations in a way. So it's maybe a bigger chess piece. Maybe it's like a rook or something like that. They can do more moves than the pawns or something. But he doesn't really care much for occult stuff. He's more of a pragmatist, very, very pragmatic. That's why you can't really lock him down into any set ideology, because he doesn't believe anything except the will to power technocracy, right? This is the unfortunate central feature of a lot of geopolitics, is that it's just pragmatic power politics. It's not about good and evil. It's not about who's right, who's wrong. It's not about the good guys in the war versus the bad guys. It's about power blocks and corporations and technocracy. So we're going to have in the Grand Chessboard basically a game plan right before the war on terror really kicks off, that is going to basically set the stage for the war on terror. Now, the book is not principally about the war on terror. It's partly an aspect of things that Brzezinski will discuss in the book. But remember that Brzezinski is in many ways the architect of the continuation of the British model of utilizing the Wahhabist, Salafist, radical Islam. The extreme Islam is something that Brzezinski pioneered the U.S. commandeering, as we know from the 70s. And it's not just 1979. It actually goes back further. Kabul University had CIA there a long time before 1979, prepping for the creation of Al-Qaeda out of the Mujahideen. So this was planned even prior to Carter and Brzezinski and Gates, although they were the formative ones that really set it into motion. Of course, we've all seen those clips of Brzezinski talking to the Taliban, telling them that God is on their side. So I'm going to show you that clip just in case you haven't seen it. I think probably most readers and listeners have seen it, but for the sake of people who might be new to this topic, let's take a look. So when we come to investigate this, having seen the clip of Brzezinski there talking about his Taliban, Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, freedom fighters, you'll notice that the heartland, as it's called, is roughly the Russian Eurasian landmass here. And so this goes back to Sir Halfred Mackinder, who was a